Welcome back, everybody. We are ready for a wrap up. We have about a half hour, maybe a little bit more than that. We can do less than that as well. I had in mind when we set this up that you might come out of the groups with a few surprises to report, with a few global solutions to this little problem. I think Ken said you were just about there, or was that KP? I had a couple of ideas about how we might proceed with this conversation. The start. I'm sorry?
We were actually almost there.
Oh, damn. Just no sense of timing. I had in mind that we would invite a couple of facilitators to make a comment or two, just to get a sense about how a couple of the groups went. In the process of doing that, we might hear from them or others of you about a question that crystallized as you were presenting and talking with each other. We don't need those questions. There are a lot of directions in which I might take us, but it would be better if we do this all together. And I would like to hold on to that original notion that we turn. I think I wanted to start with KP and then perhaps one other group, and see if any of the facilitators wants to offer us a very brief comment about a surprise, a conclusion, a challenge, a puzzlement that was crystallized during the course of your group, or a summary comment of what the conversation was like. But just 2 minutes each, okay? KP, are you still here with us?
Yeah, just had needed a second to unmute there. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, just some of the things that we were talking about. Had a really great group. I think we were kind of on the verge to solving this whole thing too. Just I think we were getting close to. But yeah, some of the things and not shocking or surprising were folks had talked about, you know, the emotional piece of this, having some fear, right? And definitely a sense of hopelessness, you know, a sense of how can, you know, this get better, and can we make it better? And then even what's the part of everyone in terms of what is your role or the part you play in making things better? There was also, I noted that folks were feeling some frustrations, and again, definitely not shocking at all. And someone had mentioned that also they felt that some folks did not have belief. There was no strength or belief in some of the challenges, or just the reality of climate change itself. So that was also something. And there was something that was, we were talking about people who have lived experience in mental health, and a really powerful comment was made about, you know, people who have the least are impacted the most. And that made a lot of sense. And it went right into talking about resources or lack thereof, and how somebody who's impacted by climate change, how differently your response might be, or even your priorities might dictate your response based on what you have and what's in front of you, as well as how difficult some of those things could be with maybe increased symptoms, and so all the way around, socially and economically, and the possibility of trauma and increased symptoms. And we also talked about emotional and psychological safety, and how people may feel not safe in those areas based on climate change. And we were about to, although we hadn't went there yet, also talk about some of the possible unhealthy coping things that come up, like substance use disorders, drinking addiction, things like that, unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Thank you. See, I was with Mary Beth for a minute. I'm seeing Claire as well. Would either of you like to say a word about the groups that you facilitated? Listen, Claire, how about you?
Say something quick, but there's music in the background because one of my kids is a musician and
I'm sorry.
he's decided, even though I asked him to be quiet, I also have 2 dogs out here. So I'm sorry about that. My group was a more humble group. They weren't about to solve the problems of the world. A lot of them expressed feeling somewhat overwhelmed with the whole issue, but hopeful. There was, on the one hand, there was a lot of feeling of being overwhelmed. They were surprised there weren't hundreds of people. Someone commented they were surprised there weren't hundreds of people here at this conference. But they also felt hopeful that human beings would rise to the occasion. A number of people see people with chronic mental illness and substance abuse. And what they saw as the biggest issues for people were things like what to do when you have heat waves, and homeless issues for homeless people and people who don't have a lot of resources when there's things like flooding and tornadoes and things. Our group wasn't sure how they wanted to, who they wanted to, as a group, weren't sure who they wanted to partner with or who they wanted to work with on this issue. A couple of them work in a clinic with Ken Thompson, so they thought they'd go with whatever he was doing. But that was the biggest thing. Their biggest concern was worry about how to handle issues for people who are chronically ill, who have substance abuse, and have very few resources, and what they can do to help them, to make sure that they're not left out. As a couple of people said, they're very aware of the inequality gap in terms of resources for people.
Thank you, Claire.
I think that's good advice to do whatever Ken does.
Did everybody hear that? Wes and I usually agree about everything, but doing what Ken recommends, I'm not sure, Wes, that's the best idea. I'm thinking as you go through this, you're talking about, we can do this or that, that speaks to one of these 4 questions that we use to sort of provide some process and structure over the course of the day. But we have the mics open, and I'm thinking that we could look at those questions one at a time and just invite anybody here to make a comment that says, here's one thing that occurred to me at the end of the day, that developed for me over the course of the day, that wasn't there before, that became vivid for me in a certain way, that surprised me in a certain way. So for example, we've talked a lot about sadness, about fear, about hopelessness. Did anybody find themselves feeling or thinking something that is there now or became evident during the course of the day that surprised you, that came up unexpectedly, that you discovered somehow?
I'd like to say something about my group in that way. That one of our members said there were so many resources in this conference, and he really would like to do a presentation. He likes to do that and adapt presentations for a wider audience. And I was surprised at how many therapists there were, and how they all have just amazing resources of being able to speak with people. And then the last thing, and it was Robert, I think, talked about a book called The Nurture Effect, and I kind of wanted to hear more about it. I wish Robert would say something more about it.
Is Robert here?
I just heard about the book today, so it was the Nurture Effect and the psychological roots of the climate crisis that were referred to. I forget who mentioned those today, but just to have a narrative in mind that makes sense. And my sense is, and we talked about feelings, and I think I'm fearful, and I think I'm fearful of confrontation, and I'm afraid to talk to people because I keep running into people who react with anger toward this whole idea of climate change. So there's a mouthful. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have Rebecca McKenzie and Diane Johnson with hands raised. Rebecca, you're up.
So I was a little surprised at something that I hadn't really thought much about before, and that is that I started working with Ready for 100 many years ago, and the recommendation from the beginning has been you need to pull in people in your community to help you develop this idea of becoming a community that is creates a 100% renewable energy option. And I know it sounds pie in the sky, but so just recently, now that was years ago, and I kept saying to myself, who can I do this with? What can I do? And I felt really intimidated by it. So recently I just asked a couple friends of mine who are public health nurses, about what they thought about working together on a project that had to do with creating resilience in our watershed. And so we're localizing this effort, but we're looking at it through a health lens, and also bringing in a variety of different ideas that have to do with the climate crisis. And so I just wanted to say that it's taken me years to think about like who I could invite. And here it was, I have good friends that are very capable and knowledgeable about working with community groups. So anyway, I just want to encourage anyone who might feel that intimidation of working with others. I tend to be a little, surprisingly, because I do have a lot of comments today, introverted, but I'm so passionate about this issue that maybe you can work with someone whom you feel connected to that would help you get out there in a way that it's taken me years to try to figure out. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. And that's right on for asking who might I work with and what are the resources that I do have or would like to have that I have access to. Diane Johnson.
I just, a couple of the surprises that actually came from our group that I just wanted to share was, if the person who said this, if you want to elaborate, please do. But starting with today's conference, they mentioned feeling very apathetic, and I think that goes along with so many people feeling very powerless on to do anything about climate change, especially with all of the doom scrolling that we hear every day about what's not being done. And but today's conference, he felt pushed the needle to action, and that we are evolving. So I think a surprise was going from apathy to feeling somewhat hopeful, and that we are evolving. And I thought that was really great to hear. And then I think another two other things that really were, I think, came out was someone had mentioned that justice and protecting nature is an act of justice. And one of the things that has happened is that we've been indoctrinated to disconnect from nature. So if we can kind of reframe that and when, really recognize that when we connect with nature, it's an act of justice, it can certainly kind of move the needle as well. And then the last thing I would say, I mean, there was a lot that I thought people said that was really, really great. But we also learned a lot today about people all over the world, all over the globe that are extremely resilient. Um, and we need to put aside our arrogance and our entitlement, and stop missing all of these wonderful opportunities to engage by keeping our mouths shut and our ears open. So, and then my own personal thought on that is, you know, whether people believe in climate change or not, sometimes if we just talk about it as if it is happening, because it is factual, what are their ideas on how to deal with it? You know, just to hear what they have to say. What are their solutions? What are the thoughts? How can we really engage? And I'm not so sure sometimes that we need to spend a lot of energy on a lot of people that are totally resistant to the reality of climate change, because I think there are so many people who do recognize that there's climate, but maybe not, they just don't know what to do. So if the resources that were presented today were fantastic. And I think there's so many ways that people can get involved and start to feel really empowered. So thank you for the conference.
Thank you, Diane. Sounds like a superb conversation that your group had. Ken, would you like to make a comment here still? And then David, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, and I'll try to be quick about this, and I'm going to miss little pieces of it, both because I don't remember it all exactly, and I want to be kind of speedy about it. But we started off having conversation within the group about the sort of dire nature of the distress that people felt, and the sense of being overwhelmed, and a lot of the sort of negative feelings that go along with feeling threatened and in a bad place. And then we went to the question about what people can do to help out. What gifts do they have to give? And we got into some good discussion there about people's ability in various different kind of ways to help communicate, to connect, and to get people to think differently about the challenges that we have before us. And that led us into an interesting discussion about the folks who are, in fact, not entirely getting it, and the issue of how important it was for us to find a way to pull together, to get to some kind of shared understanding, so that we can all collaborate, because it's in the strength of the collaboration that we will find the ingenuity we need to move forward. And that brought us to a conversation about the role of mental health workers, and in particular, the challenge that we're going to face when we recognize that a lot of our patterns of consumption, how we think and use things, are going to change, have to change, and that connects with the idea that a lot of what we consume and how we consume it is not based necessarily on need, but on want. And a lot of that want is sort of generated by all kinds of forces in our society. So we're going to look at very significant changes, and we're going to have to help people, I think, as mental health professionals, to deal with the losses that are going to go with the changes in the patterns of consumption. That then led us into an interesting conversation about, well, what is the culture in which people are willing to give up things or to imagine a world that's different? And here a connection really came out. This is where I had a moment, and it's thanks to folks from People's Oakland. There's a notion in healthcare, right, or in health, not just healthcare, that promulgated by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, that we should be creating a culture of health. Well, I just learned today that People's Oakland's mission statement, or its I don't want to use the word mission statement, its sort of basic principles are about creating a culture of love. And I think the idea of creating a culture of love in the face of the climate change challenges that we face is exactly what we need to figure out how to do.
That sounds rather beautiful. And who could say no? But who would say how? Maybe a little more complicated. Nevertheless, we're looking for missions, directions, trying to get a compass reading on the North Pole, whatever's left of it. Okay, Dave Dinich.
Well, I just have to say, I think what Ken just said was the most important thing that was said all day. I raised my hand because I wanted to respond to, I think it was Diane, about the naysayers who aren't believing in this. What if we phrase the question, okay, but what do you think we should do about those people in Alaska who have for generations, been living at a certain place, and they've been making their living a certain way, and now their whole village is gone, and in other places, and this and that. So what do we do? Speaking about that culture of love, do we have any responsibility for people in Pennsylvania, in Detroit, and other places, who are losing their health or their livelihood? Or their house, what do we do about that? Should we say to these people, well, you shouldn't have lived there? Or, what do we say? Do we have any responsibility to our neighbor? Of course, that gets into immigration too, but maybe focusing on not climate change, but what climate change does to people, and what's our response to that as a workaround for those deniers.
Got it. Claire Cohen. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so I just wanted to take what Ken said about a culture of love a little further. So one of the things if humanity is to survive, is we've unfortunately these last 50 years had a culture of me, a culture of self. And if we're going to survive, there has to be a culture of love of other people in this country, people who are the marginalized groups, of other people. And there's going to be mass migrations. There's already some of the mass migrations of people from Central America are in part, not totally, but in part related to climate changes that are occurring already. So what is our obligation? Are we our brother's keeper? And what is our obligation to each other? And if pulling together is going to help us more, or is continuing this culture of me, which I think it's not, but is this continuing this culture of me, myself, and what's in it for me, what's that gonna do to us as a people, as a culture, as a species? So that's just what I wanted to add to what Ken was saying.
Anybody else have a question at the moment?
So, can I tell you what the culture of love is for People's Oakland?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, it's hope, intelligence, respect, empathy, and humility.
Say that once more, please.
Hope, intelligence, respect, empathy, and humility.
Humility. Thank you. What's your name, please?
Julia.
Hello, Julia. Thank you.
And I'm a member of People's Oakland.
Glad you're here.
Thank you. I learned a lot today that I didn't know.
How about this, everybody? Thinking about yourself. Thinking about yourself. Will you be walking out the door, the virtual door, obviously? Will you be walking out the door with something specific in mind that you're thinking, yes, that's something I want to do, or want to figure out how to do, or there's somebody I want to work with that I hadn't thought about before? Yeah. For example, for myself, I've been involved on the education side of things when Dave Pollock talked about developing a curriculum for the Oregon Center, the Oregon Medical Center where he works. What is it called again? OSU, is it?
OSHU.
OSHU. So at the Oregon State Health University, he mentioned that they were developing a curriculum, and I've had a little bit of experience with curriculum development. I don't think we have that in Pittsburgh. There are a few people I've heard about who are interested in it, but that would be an example that would speak to something that would be relatively feasible, for me, of some interest. Okay, there are the possibilities. But in any case, that would be my take home for tonight. Anybody have an idea today that they didn't have yesterday about what you might want to do or who you might want to do it with?
I would like to do something like what I learned today, bring it back to People's Oakland, and maybe People's Oakland can join one of the other groups to work on this, and maybe get other peers involved.
I want to do it with a group that sees itself as the National Rifle Association of Climate Change, or Teachers Association, who can throw around a little legislative weight.
Claire?
So I'm going to try to lean on some of you guys like Wes and Ken and Mary Beth to come to join Pittsburgh Green New Deal and speaking to people about this issue, because we've actually had a lot of invitations to speak, and people are always turning to me as the mental health expert, and a lot of them I've turned down and they've had to do without me. So it'd be nice to have some companions who can join in and not just have it all fall on me as the for the mental health and the health expert part.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
I have a bunch of tabs open in my browser just from all the different resources that people offered here, and I can't wait to go look at them. And I have about 5 or 6 of the panelists that I'd like to be on my dissertation committee, so I'll be emailing you. This has been awesome, and just the connections and seeing what's going on in Pittsburgh and all of that has been really inspiring. So thank you.
One of the things that has impressed me is sort of the need to connect with those folks who think differently from us. And I think, one of the sort of real tragedies of the divisiveness of our society has been, the generation of animosity that has really kept any movement and engagement at bay. And so, I mean, I think that's, when we talk about a culture of love, I think rather than, blame and some of the animosity that's generated towards people who don't think like us, we need to figure out ways to make connections and engage them in a way that I think it was Matt was talking about, engage them in a way that doesn't involve shaming and blaming, and really finding some common ground.
It's interesting to me to consider what are the skills, the approaches, the strategies that some of us have by virtue of genetics, perhaps, early life experience, in other words, or by professional training that would lead us to think, I can sit down and talk with somebody in a useful and a productive way in the face of the fact that we disagree about some important things. Is picking up on what you're saying, Wes, that we're facing divisions that are more dramatic, more threatening than they might have been in the past. But at the same time, they're not different. They're not different in a qualitative sense from what's been there before. I'm wondering out loud with you, what's the skill set that we bring to the table as mental health people, as clergy, as teachers that would say, yes, I deal with disagreement all the time. And as a lighthearted way of saying that, for example, I'm in my 53rd year of marriage. I deal with disagreement and adversity all the time.
Hey,
It's been really pretty fruitful. But I'm thinking about that in psychiatry as well. In mental health people, we deal all the time with adversity, but it's in a protected environment. We're not obligated to share our disagreements in a constructive way. I was thinking about Wanda and Thelma Mitchell, the other clergy here. Dave Dinich bends this way sometimes, maybe others of you, that there's something about a religious grounding or spiritual outlook that permits a cutting through or seeing through, a transcending of the ordinary versions of I'm right, you're wrong, better and worser, in a way that promotes inclusion, in a way that kind of fosters a collective understanding, a sense of community. Wanda, you look like you're thinking to say something about that.
I wasn't, but yeah, I know that for me, this is where I find community, and I find people who care care about love and use this as their first motion. Um, that's it.
Well, community is about having a common interest or a common identity, a common history, or perhaps a common future. It wouldn't be hard to get a plan together to talk to people whom we usually don't talk to in the face of these kind of important issues, I imagine. Wes Sowers, are you here? Wes,
Seem to be.
there you are. Last thoughts for the day?
It was really incredibly rich, and it went entirely much better than I expected it to. So all credit goes to you, Bob, for that. But I really was really impressed, and felt that I learned a lot, and that we had some incredible speakers with really great ideas that really allowed us to think about these issues in new ways. And I think overall, despite some of the pessimism that I've been plagued with in recent times, there was certainly ways that we found for hope, and I think that was one of the real impressive things about the day, and what our participants had to say. So I would sort of end on that note, that I think there is some reason for optimism if we can do some of the things that we heard about today, and if we can engage people in a constructive way, and hopefully begin to change some minds and open some minds.
I have a last thought as a closing thought. When Wes talks about somehow generating or discovering hope, somebody I know really well, a clinician, says that when somebody is telling you that they have no hope, that it's always the case that they have hope. You just have to point it out to them. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't have hope that coming here would yield something useful to you. The point of this not being that one has hope or not, one does, but that our job is to help people become conscious of the fact that they have hope. That we don't feel hopeful, we have thoughts of not being hopeful, but being here in these ways is a clear signal that we are hopeful. We'll stop there. Wes, you can say something?
I was just going to say, you know, we have to plant that hope in the minds of the hundreds of people who didn't show up today.
Yeah.
And hope that you can all be ambassadors to those folks, and we can grow a movement.
Yeah, Wes, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Great day. Glad that we could contribute, that I could contribute, and we all made it happen. It was really
Bravo.
collective
Beautiful.
effort, great effort. Be well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.